He spoke in a language he thought she would never understand, but her answer was about to silence the entire room. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below, and if you believe respect should matter more than status, hit like and subscribe. Now, back to Amelia Brooks. The Black Orchid restaurant was known as a place where powerful people gathered. Behind its elegant glass doors, deals were made. Fortunes were protected, and reputations were carefully controlled. Every corner of the restaurant represented luxury. The golden lights reflected across polished marble floors. The quiet music created an atmosphere of sophistication. The guests wore expensive suits and designer clothing. But on this particular evening, the most surprising moment would not come from the richest person in the room. It would come from the person everyone overlooked. Amelia Brooks moved between the tables with quiet confidence. She was a black waitress at Black Orchid restaurant. To most guests, she was simply another employee. Someone who brought drinks. Someone who served meals. Someone who was expected to stay invisible. And Amelia was used to that. She knew many people noticed her uniform before they noticed her. But she never allowed other people's opinions to define her. Because she believed something simple. A person's value was not determined by their position. At the center of the restaurant sat Alexander Carter, the Korean Mafia Boss, a man whose name carried influence across the city. His yellow-toned skin, tattoos across his neck and body, and cold expression made people careful with every word they spoke around him. He was surrounded by business partners from overseas. Every person at the table understood one thing. Alexander Carter controlled the room. Not because he demanded attention, but because his reputation arrived before he did. During the meeting, Alexander spoke quietly with his guests. He switched naturally between languages, English, Korean, and others used for international business. Then Amelia approached the table to serve the final course. One of the guests made a small complaint about the service. Nothing serious. But Alexander's expression changed. He looked at Amelia. For reasons she did not understand, he decided to make an example of her. Perhaps he wanted to show his guests that mistakes had consequences. Perhaps he wanted to remind everyone who held the power. In a calm voice, Alexander spoke in Korean. She should learn her place. The words were quiet, almost casual, because he believed only the people at the table would understand. He believed Amelia heard nothing. The guests remained silent. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked away, because nobody wanted to challenge Alexander Carter. Amelia stood there holding the tray. Her expression remained calm, but something changed in her eyes. She understood every word, every sentence, every hidden meaning. She had spent years learning languages because she believed communication was the first step toward understanding people. Not controlling them, not judging them, understanding them. But she said nothing. Not yet. She simply placed the dishes on the table. Alexander watched her carefully. He expected embarrassment, fear, confusion. Instead, he saw calmness. That surprised him, because most people reacted differently around him. They became nervous. They became careful. They became smaller. But Amelia did not. She simply looked at him with quiet dignity. And for the first time that evening, Alexander Carter wondered if the person he underestimated was the only person in the room who truly understood him. The entire room was waiting for Amelia Brooks to react, because everyone expected the same thing. Fear, embarrassment, silence. They expected the Black Waitress to lower her head and accept the humiliation. But Amelia did something unexpected. She remained calm. She continued serving the table. And that confused everyone. Victoria Hayes watched from across the room with a satisfied smile. She believed Amelia had no idea what had been said. She believed the moment was already over. But Alexander Carter noticed something different. The waitress was not acting like someone who was unaware. She was acting like someone who understood everything. That bothered him, because people usually reacted differently. Around him, they became nervous. They avoided eye contact. They changed their behavior the moment they learned his name. But Amelia did not. She simply continued working, with dignity, with patience, with complete control over herself. Later, as the dinner continued, one of Alexander's business partners made another comment in Korean. A comment meant to test whether Amelia truly understood. The guest smiled. She probably thinks we are discussing the weather. A few people laughed quietly. Amelia heard every word, but she said nothing. Not because she was afraid, because she understood something important. Not every insult deserved a reaction. Sometimes silence revealed more than anger. Alexander watched her carefully. He was used to people fighting for his attention, fighting for his approval, fighting for a place near his power. But Amelia seemed completely different. She did not need anyone to notice her. She did not need anyone to validate her intelligence. And that made her impossible to ignore. When Amelia returned with the final dishes, Alexander spoke again in Korean. Tell the manager to remember that employees should know their place. The words were deliberate. A test. A challenge. He wanted to see if she truly understood. Amelia placed the dishes down calmly. Then she looked at him. For a moment, the entire table became silent. Because something in her expression had changed. Not anger. Not fear. Confidence. Alexander expected her to remain quiet. Instead, Amelia answered. In perfect Korean. Respect is something people earn through their actions, not something they demand because of their position. The room froze. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The business partners looked at each other in shock. Victoria's smile disappeared. Because the woman she believed could not understand, had understood everything. Alexander stared at Amelia. For the first time that evening, he had no immediate response. Not because he was offended, because he was surprised. The waitress standing in front of him was not just someone who knew a language. She understood the meaning behind it. She understood the culture. She understood the intention. And more importantly, she understood him. Where did you learn Korean? Alexander finally asked. His voice was quieter now. Amelia looked at him. I learned because I wanted to understand people. The answer caught him off guard. Most people learn skills to gain something. Money, recognition, opportunity. But Amelia's reason was different. Connection. Alexander leaned back slightly, studying her. The person he had underestimated had just shown more confidence than many powerful people he knew. And the entire restaurant realized something at the same moment. The Black Waitress was not someone who needed to be taught her place. She was someone who had always known her worth. The room had gone silent. Because nobody expected the waitress to answer. Especially not in Korean. Alexander Carter stared at Amelia Brooks. Not with anger. Not with disappointment. With surprise. For years, Alexander had been surrounded by people who tried to impress him. They learned his preferences. They studied his habits. They changed themselves whenever he entered a room. But Amelia was different. She did not change. She simply revealed who she had always been. The business partners sitting around the table exchanged uncertain looks. They had expected a simple evening. A powerful man giving an order. An employee accepting it. A clear difference between them. But that difference had disappeared. Because the woman they considered invisible had just spoken with more confidence than anyone at the table. Victoria Hayes leaned forward. So you understood everything? Her voice carried disbelief. Amelia looked at her calmly. Yes. A simple answer. No arrogance. No attempt to embarrass anyone. Just the truth. Victoria smiled slightly. Then why pretend you didn't? Amelia looked toward the table. Because understanding something does not mean I need to react immediately. The answer surprised everyone. Even Alexander. Because most people would have used that moment to attack. To prove they were smarter. To make others feel small. But Amelia did not. She had the opportunity to embarrass them. She chose not to. And Alexander noticed. That mattered. Where did you learn Korean? Alexander asked again. This time, his tone was different. The question was not a challenge. It was genuine curiosity. Amelia placed the final plate on the table. My grandmother taught me some when I was young. She paused. Later, I continued learning on my own. Alexander studied her. Why? Amelia looked confused. Why continue? She nodded. Amelia thought for a moment. Because language is not only about words. A pause. It's about understanding how people think, how they feel, and how they see the world. The answer stayed with Alexander. Because it was something he rarely heard. Most people learn skills for advantage. For business. For influence. But Amelia learned because she wanted connection. Not control. That difference was impossible to ignore. Marcus Reed, standing nearby, watched Alexander carefully. He had known Alexander for years. He knew when the mafia boss was angry. He knew when he was calculating. He knew when he was preparing to make a decision. But this was different. Alexander was thinking. The man who always had an answer suddenly had questions. Amelia turned to leave. But Alexander stopped her. Wait. She looked back. You never mentioned you understood Korean. Amelia smiled slightly. You never asked. The answer froze the room again. Because it was true. Alexander had assumed. He had looked at her uniform. Her position. Her role in the restaurant. and he had made a judgment before knowing anything about her. For the first time that night, he recognized the mistake. Not because Amelia proved she was intelligent. She had always been. But because he realized he never bothered to look. The Korean Mafia boss had spent years reading people. Their intentions. Their weaknesses. Their ambitions. Yet he had failed to see the person standing right in front of him. A woman who carried knowledge quietly. A woman who had no need to announce her abilities. A woman who understood respect better than many powerful people in the room. As Amelia walked away, Alexander continued watching her. And for the first time in a long time, he wondered how many other people he had underestimated. Because the biggest surprise of the evening was not that the Black Waitress spoke Korean. It was that she had never needed anyone's approval to prove her worth. The question remained in Alexander Carter's mind long after that evening ended. Not because Amelia Brooks knew Korean. Not because she surprised everyone in the room. But because she revealed something much deeper. She had never been trying to impress anyone. She had simply been herself. And that was something Alexander rarely encountered. Inside his private office the next morning, Alexander sat silently while Marcus Reed placed a folder on the desk. Her background. Alexander opened it. The information inside was not what he expected. No hidden connections. No powerful family. No attempt to use her skills for personal gain. Just a woman who worked hard and quietly helped people around her. She really is just a waitress? Marcus looked at him. That is what everyone sees. A pause. But they are not seeing everything. Alexander looked through the documents. Amelia had worked in different communities. She had learned multiple languages. She had helped international customers communicate. She had assisted co-workers who struggled. And she had never used her abilities to make herself appear superior. That detail caught his attention. Because Alexander knew many people who collected skills only to gain influence. But Amelia collected knowledge to understand others. Later that day, Alexander visited the restaurant again. Not as the feared mafia boss. Not as someone demanding answers. He came because he wanted to understand. Amelia noticed him while organizing the tables. Mr. Carter. Alexander nodded. I have a question. She waited. Why did you never tell anyone you spoke Korean? Amelia smiled slightly. Because nobody needed to know. The answer surprised him. Most people would use that to get ahead. She looked at him. Maybe. A pause. But knowing something does not make me better than anyone else. Those words stayed with him. Because they challenged a belief Alexander had carried for years. In his world, knowledge was power. Information created advantage. Secrets created control. But Amelia saw knowledge differently. She saw it as a bridge. Not a weapon. Your language skills. Alexander paused. They are impressive. Amelia nodded politely. Thank you. But you never use them to prove you are smarter. She looked at him. Why would I? A simple question. Yet it carried weight. Because Alexander realized something. Amelia did not need to be the center of attention. She did not need people to admire her. Her confidence came from within. That was rare. Later, Alexander spoke with Evelyn. His mother noticed the change immediately. You respect her. Alexander looked away. I respect what she represents. Evelyn smiled. Which is? Alexander thought for a moment. Someone who has every reason to be bitter. A pause. But chooses to remain kind. The answer revealed more than he intended. Because Alexander understood that Amelia's strength was not only her intelligence. It was her character. She could have embarrassed him in front of everyone. She could have exposed his mistake. She could have made him feel small. Instead, she responded with dignity. And that affected him more than anger ever could. Meanwhile, the people at Black Orchid restaurant began talking about the night everyone witnessed. The waitress who answered the mafia boss. The woman who turned humiliation into respect. The employee who reminded powerful people that intelligence did not belong to one class of people. But Amelia continued working as if nothing had changed. Because for her, nothing had. She was still the same person. And that was exactly why Alexander Carter could not stop thinking about her. The person he underestimated was slowly becoming the person who changed the way he saw the world. The world saw Amelia Brooks as a waitress. But Alexander Carter was beginning to see something different. He saw intelligence. He saw patience. He saw a person who carried more strength than many people with power. And that realization forced him to question himself. Because for the first time in years, Alexander wondered how many people he had judged without truly knowing them. Inside his private office, the city lights reflected against the glass windows. Marcus Reed placed another report on the desk. Something else you should know. Alexander looked up. What? Marcus opened the file. Amelia has been helping international customers at the restaurant for years. Alexander listened. She translates when people struggle. She helps employees communicate. She has even helped guests avoid misunderstandings. Alexander looked at the information. Why didn't anyone know? Marcus gave a small smile. Because she never told anyone. That answer stayed with him. Most people collected achievements to display them. They wanted recognition. They wanted admiration. They wanted others to know what they could do. But Amelia was different. She had knowledge without arrogance, skill without pride, confidence without the need for attention. And Alexander found that unusual. Later that week, Alexander returned to Black Orchid Restaurant. This time, he did not come with business partners. He did not come to test anyone. He simply wanted to understand. Amelia was organizing the tables when he approached. Amelia. She looked surprised. Mr. Carter. He nodded. I wanted to ask you something. She waited. Why did you let everyone believe you didn't understand? Amelia paused. Because the answer was simple. I didn't think it mattered. Alexander looked at her. Not everyone would say that. She smiled slightly. Maybe. A pause. But understanding something does not mean I need to use it against someone. Those words affected him. Because Alexander knew exactly what she meant. In his world, information was power. Secrets were weapons. Knowledge was something people used to gain advantage. But Amelia saw knowledge differently. She saw it as a way to connect, not dominate. Do people often underestimate you? Alexander asked. Amelia looked away for a moment. Sometimes. Does it bother you? She thought carefully. It used to. A quiet pause. But I learned that other people's assumptions do not decide who I am. Alexander remained silent. Because that was a lesson he needed to hear. His entire life had been built around assumptions. He assumed people wanted something. He assumed weakness meant inability. He assumed status revealed value. But Amelia had proven otherwise. A person wearing a simple uniform had shown more self-control than many powerful people he knew. Later that evening, Alexander spoke with Evelyn. His mother noticed the change in him immediately. You admire her. Alexander looked at her. I respect her. Evelyn smiled. That is not something you say often. He looked down. She had every reason to embarrass me. A pause. But she didn't. Evelyn nodded. Because she understands something you are still learning. What? Power means nothing without character. The words remained with him. Because they were true. Amelia could have used that moment to make Alexander feel small. Instead, she chose dignity. She had the ability to defeat him in that room. But she chose kindness. And that was more powerful than any argument. Meanwhile, the story of the Black Waitress who answered the Korean Mafia Boss spread among the restaurant staff. People no longer saw Amelia as someone invisible. They saw someone remarkable. But Amelia continued working the same way. Quietly. Humbly. Without changing who she was. And that was what fascinated Alexander the most. She did not become valuable because people finally noticed her. People finally noticed her because she had always been valuable. And for the first time in a long time, Alexander Carter understood that the most powerful person in the room was not always the one giving orders. Sometimes, it was the person who knew their worth without needing anyone else to recognize it. The mistake was not that Alexander Carter underestimated Amelia Brooks. The mistake was that he believed he was the only person in the room who understood power. For years, Alexander built his reputation around control. Information was power. Fear was protection. Knowledge was an advantage. But Amelia showed him something different. Sometimes knowledge was not meant to control people. Sometimes it was meant to understand them. After learning more about Amelia, Alexander began noticing the things others ignored. The way she treated every customer with patience. The way she helped employees without expecting anything. The way she carried intelligence without needing anyone to praise her. Inside the Carter estate, Alexander looked through another report about her background. Marcus Reed stood nearby. She is unusual. Alexander looked up. Because she speaks multiple languages? Marcus shook his head. No. A pause. Because she never uses them to make herself look important. Those words stayed with Alexander. Because Marcus was right. Many people search for knowledge because they wanted power. Amelia searched for knowledge because she wanted connection. That difference changed everything. Later, Alexander returned to Black Orchid Restaurant. This time, he did not sit at the table of powerful guests. He sat quietly and watched. He watched Amelia speak with customers. He watched her help a foreign visitor understand the menu. He watched her patiently explain things that others would have ignored. And he realized something. Her intelligence was not the surprising part. Her humility was. When Amelia finished her shift, Alexander approached her. "You make it look easy." She looked confused. "Make what look easy?" "Understanding people." Amelia smiled slightly. "I don't think I understand everyone." Alexander looked at her. "More than most." She shook her head. "People usually show you who they are if you take the time to listen." The answer was simple, but Alexander found it powerful. Because his entire life had been built around reading people quickly, finding weaknesses, predicting actions, protecting himself. But Amelia did something different. She listened before judging. That was something Alexander rarely did. That evening, Evelyn noticed her son's thoughts were elsewhere. "You are learning from her." Alexander looked at his mother. "Maybe." Evelyn smiled. "That is rare." "What is?" "For you to admit someone taught you something." Alexander looked down. Because it was true. The Korean Mafia boss had spent years believing he had nothing left to learn, until a black waitress answered him in a language he thought she did not understand. And in that moment, she did more than surprise him. She challenged the way he saw the world. Meanwhile, Victoria Hayes continued telling people that Amelia was just lucky. She believed one impressive moment did not change someone's position. But she misunderstood. Amelia's value did not come from speaking Korean. It did not come from impressing Alexander. It did not come from being noticed. Her value existed long before anyone recognized it. And Alexander finally understood that. The person who needed to change was never Amelia. It was him. The powerful man who thought he understood everyone was finally learning to see people clearly. And that lesson came from the person he expected to overlook. The city had always known Alexander Carter as a man who could make people listen. A single command, a single look, a single word. That was usually enough. But Amelia Brooks had done something no one else dared to do. She made him listen. Not through fear, not through power, through truth. After discovering Amelia's abilities and understanding her character, Alexander began questioning the way he viewed people. For years, he believed appearances revealed everything. A person's position, their influence, their usefulness. But Amelia proved that assumptions could hide the most important things about someone. Inside a private meeting room, Alexander sat with his closest advisors. The discussion was about expanding his international business connections. One advisor mentioned finding someone who could help with communication between different communities. "We need someone trustworthy." Alexander looked thoughtful. Then he remembered Amelia. Not because she spoke Korean, not because she impressed him, but because of the reason behind it. She used knowledge to help people, not to gain power. Find people who understand others. The room became quiet, because that was not the kind of statement Alexander usually made. Marcus Reed noticed. "You are changing your priorities." Alexander looked at him. "Maybe I was looking at the wrong things before." That answer surprised Marcus, because Alexander Carter rarely admitted mistakes. Later that week, Alexander visited a community event supported by his organization. He watched people from different backgrounds communicate, different languages, different cultures, different experiences. And he saw something Amelia had understood long before him. Differences did not separate people. The lack of understanding did. Amelia was. They're helping volunteers. She translated conversations. She helped people feel comfortable. She connected people who might have never spoken otherwise. Alexander watched quietly. A powerful man surrounded by influence, learning from someone who never sought it. After the event, he approached her. "You make people feel understood." Amelia smiled. "I just try to listen." Alexander looked at her. "Most people don't." She laughed softly. "Most people are busy trying to be heard." The answer stayed with him, because it described his world perfectly. Everyone wanted something from him. Everyone wanted him to notice them. Everyone wanted their voice to matter. But very few people stopped to understand others. Amelia did, and that made her different. Meanwhile, Victoria Hayes continued criticizing Amelia. She believed the waitress had simply been lucky. She believed knowing another language did not change anything. But she missed the point. The language was never the reason Amelia stood out. It was what she did with it. She used knowledge to create respect, not superiority. That evening, Alexander stood alone in his office. He looked at the city below, a place where he had spent years building influence, years creating a name people feared. But now he wondered something. What was the value of power if it could not help people? For the first time, Alexander Carter was not thinking about control. He was thinking about responsibility, and it all started with one unexpected answer. A waitress speaking a language he thought she did not know. A woman proving that intelligence did not belong to the powerful. A person showing him that dignity could exist anywhere, even in the places where nobody thought to look. And Alexander finally understood. The person who changed the way he saw the world was the person he once failed to see at all. The world had always seen Alexander Carter as someone who had all the answers. But Amelia Brooks showed him something unexpected. Sometimes the person with the most knowledge was not the person with the most power. Sometimes the person with the most wisdom was the one who used that knowledge to help others. And that changed everything. After months of observing Amelia, Alexander made a decision. He wanted to give her an opportunity. Not because she impressed him, not because she surprised him by speaking Korean, but because he respected the person she was. Inside the Carter organization, Alexander announced a new international communication program. A program designed to help employees from different backgrounds work together. Many people were surprised, because they knew where the idea came from. The woman who had once stood quietly at a restaurant table. The woman everyone underestimated. The woman who proved that understanding people was more valuable than controlling them. Marcus Reed looked at the proposal. You are building this because of her. Alexander looked at him. No. A pause. I am building this because she reminded me what matters. That answer showed how much he had changed. The old Alexander would have focused on profit, efficiency, advantage. The new Alexander focused on people. Later, Alexander spoke with Amelia about the opportunity. I want you to lead the program. Amelia looked surprised. Me? Yes. She shook her head slightly. There are many people more qualified. Alexander looked at her. That is exactly why. She did not understand. You have the knowledge. He paused. But more importantly, you know how to use it. Amelia became quiet, because she understood what he meant. Knowledge without compassion could create distance. But knowledge with humility could bring people together. She accepted the opportunity, not because of Alexander's name, not because of the power connected to it, but because she believed the program could help people. And that was exactly why he chose her. Meanwhile, Victoria Hayes watched the changes happening around her. She saw Amelia receiving respect from people who once ignored her. She saw Alexander treating someone without status as an equal. And for the first time, she questioned everything she believed. Because the woman she dismissed as just a waitress had achieved something money could never buy. Genuine respect. One evening, Alexander and Amelia stood outside the restaurant where everything began. The lights inside reflected. Through the windows. The same place where he once spoke without considering who was listening. The same place where Amelia changed his perspective. You know, Alexander said, that night could have ended very differently. Amelia looked at him. How? I could have continued believing I was right. A quiet moment passed. But you made me question myself. She smiled. I didn't do anything special. Alexander shook his head. That is what makes it special. Because Amelia never tried to change him. She never demanded an apology. She never used his mistake against him. She simply showed him another way. And that was something Alexander could never forget. The man who once believed power came from making others listen, had learned that true influence came from listening first. The Korean Mafia Boss still had power, still had influence, still carried the reputation that made people careful around him. But now, he used that power differently. Because a Black Waitress taught him the most important lesson. Understanding people was not a weakness. It was the beginning of true strength. Years later, people would still remember the night Alexander Carter walked into Black Orchid Restaurant. But they would not remember it because of his power. They would not remember it because of his reputation. They would remember it because a Black Waitress reminded one of the most powerful men in the city what humility looked like. Amelia Brooks became the symbol of something Alexander had forgotten. That intelligence without compassion meant nothing. That knowledge without kindness created distance. And that true strength came from understanding others. The international communication program grew across the city. Workers from different backgrounds found new opportunities. Families from different communities connected. People who once struggled to be heard finally had a place where their voices mattered. And Amelia continued leading the program the same way she lived her life. Quietly, patiently, with respect. She never acted like she was better than anyone. She never used her abilities to make others feel smaller. Because Amelia understood something Alexander had taken years to learn. A person's gifts were not meant to separate them from others. They were meant to bring people closer. Across the city, Alexander's reputation changed. He was still the Korean Mafia boss. His yellow-toned skin, tattoos across his neck and body, and powerful presence still reminded people of the man who once commanded fear. But now, people saw something different. They saw responsibility. They saw leadership. They saw a man who finally understood the purpose of power. Marcus Reed noticed the transformation. You know what is interesting? Alexander looked at him. What? For years, everyone wanted to stand near you because of your influence. A pause. Now people respect you because of your actions. Alexander looked toward the window. Because he understood. Fear had created obedience. But respect created loyalty. And he learned that lesson from the person he once overlooked. Later that evening, Alexander returned to Black Orchid Restaurant. The place looked exactly the same. The same lights. The same tables. The same room where everything began. He stood near the table where Amelia had answered him in Korean. The moment that changed everything. He remembered believing he understood the situation. He remembered believing he understood her. But he was wrong. He had only seen what was visible. A waitress. A uniform. A position. He had not seen the person. Until she showed him. Amelia joined him near the window. You still come here. Alexander smiled slightly. Sometimes. Why? He looked around the restaurant. Because this is where I learned something important. She waited. I spent years thinking power meant having control over others. A pause. But I was wrong. Amelia looked at him. Power means having the ability to make things better. The silence between them felt different now. Not uncomfortable. Not distant. Just understanding. Because two people from completely different worlds had discovered the same truth. A person's value was never determined by their position. Not by their job. Not by their wealth. Not by how others judged them. The world would always remember Alexander Carter as the Korean Mafia boss. The powerful man. The feared name. But those who knew the full story remembered something else. They remembered the woman who answered him when he thought she could not. The woman who taught him that humility was not weakness. It was wisdom. Because sometimes, the person you underestimate is the person who teaches you the lesson you needed most. And that day, Alexander Carter finally understood the language everyone could understand. Respect.